So there was a point in my tenure in Baltimore and Shomrei Emunah where there were a group of women. Thank you. The people have the handout?
Yeah.
And get me one. Okay. Oh. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So the group of women who wanted to just also stay up all night and maybe have a class together or study session together or whatever. So I looked into at that point various forums that deal with such questions. I found one actually. Actually, I found one approach from a sefer by a great Talmid Chacham who happens to be a Satmar Chassid. So he's not likely to be a women's libnik, but he felt that, yes, women should stay up all night, or as much as they can, and study Torah on Leil Shavuos, on one condition. And that condition is that for the past 40, well, if I was speaking Erev Shavuos, I would say for the past 49 days, they counted Sfira every single night and didn't miss one. And if that's true, that would show that we have, as Amira pointed out, that they have the passion. If you can do it and remember every week, 7 weeks in a row, every single night to count Sfira, then you're ready to have Matan Torah, you're ready for Leil Shavuos. However, I personally remember writing to him and saying, why don't we have the same requirement for men? that they don't have the privilege of staying up for Leil Shavuos unless they anticipated it and counted toward it every day, day after day, from the second night of Pesach until the last night before Shavuos. And he sent back, of all things, he sent me back a little letter with various comments, but also with a smiley face. And the smiley face said it all. The topic I chose is Kavod Hatorah. There are many, many aspects to Torah. And one is, as we just heard, the passion that one has for Torah, the thirst for Torah, desire to study Torah. There's a famous passage in the Hakdama, in the preface to a sefer called Eglei Tal, which is a sefer on the 39 malachos, the 39 types of work that are prohibited on Shabbos. And the author of it was the Sakhachover Rebbe, the Avnei Nezer, one of the great Hasidic Rabbanim of the very late 19th century and early 20th century. And he writes there that he was asked a question. The question that someone asked him is, I study Torah because I love it. It's great. It makes me happy. I get into it. I forget everything else that I'm doing, and I'm just focusing on what I'm learning, and it gives me a spiritual high and an emotional high, and it's a wonderful thing. So I feel guilty, I'm enjoying it too much, and that's my motive. My motive is enjoyment. So the Avnei Nezer said, I don't understand the question. I don't understand the question. What you're doing is precisely what Torah is all about. Torah is all about simcha. Torah is not a homework assignment that you have to suffer through. Torah is something to enjoy. In fact, people often ask the question if they're they want to devote Matan Torah, they want to devote Shavuos to a time of planning what they're going to learn for the next year, to show that they're increasing their Torah study. Should I learn Gemara? Should I learn Tanakh? Should I learn Musar? Should I learn Halacha? And the Gemara gives a very simple one-sentence answer to that. Ein adam lomeid elo ma shelibo chafetz. A person cannot really study anything unless he really likes it. So you find something that you really enjoy in Torah. That not only is there nothing wrong with that, writes the Sakhachover Rebbe, Zatzal, but that's the essence of Torah study. Sas anochi alim rosecha kamotzei shol rov. I am so joyous in learning Torah as if I found a great treasure. That's the spirit that we're striving to achieve. I prepared, as usual for me. I over-prepared, and I understand we're running a little bit late, so I want to get started on some of the chomer, some of the meat of what I have to present. And I'm beginning with, as you can see in your booklets, I have an outline for you. The outline mentions that there'll be some text study from two essays or selections from two essays by Rav Simcha Zisel Broida. I'll speak about him in a moment. And also devote at least some time to the whole issue of women and Birchat Hatorah. And I think dressing properly for Torah study might maybe just touch upon it and not really cover it thoroughly. But I want to introduce you to the author of these first two selections that you have a printout in front of you with the original Hebrew, which will go through parts of the text together. But it's important, I think, anytime one studies anything really, but especially when you study Torah in more or less recent times, to know who the person was, what was his background, what was his social context, what were the problems that he faced in his life, what were his achievements, etc. So the man that I'm going to introduce you today, his name was Rav Simcha Zisel Broida. Rav Simcha Zisel, the name Simcha Zisel, is a name which is well known in the Musar movement. The Musar movement was founded in the middle and late 1800s by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter had various Talmidim. One of them was a man called the Alter von Kelm, the old man of Kelm. Kelm was a very small town in Lithuania, where there was a very interesting yeshiva, interesting in its own right. Sadly enough, the yeshiva of Kelm decided not to move when Hitler invaded Poland, Lithuania, etc. Many of the yeshivas fled. They fled to Vilna for a time. There's dramatic stories about how many of them, far too few, were able to escape one way or another. But some yeshivos had a different perspective. They had bitachon, they had emunah, and things would be okay. And the entire yeshiva and town of Kelm was totally massacred. There are eyewitnesses who wrote up the massacre, and on Rosh Chodesh is not a time to think about these kinds of things too much. But the Alter from Kelm, by the way, the custom in Lithuania was that the founder of the yeshiva was often referred to as der Alter of, the old man of Kelm, or the old man of Slobodka, or the old man of what this yeshiva or the other. These old men were a lot younger than I am when they became known as der Alter von Kelm. But the Bachrim in the yeshiva, of course, were young teenagers or men in their 20s, and they looked at a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old as der Alter, the old man over there in the corner. The Alter from Kelm was named Simcha Zisel, and therefore many of his followers took followers or descendants, genetic descendants, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, carried the name Simcha Zisel. I had a Rabbi in yeshiva in elementary school in Torah Semis in Borough Park, named Rav Simcha Zisel Levovitz, whose father was Rav Yerucham Levovitz, who was a famous leader in the Mir yeshiva in Lithuania, and the name Simcha Zisel is going down through the ages. This man too was a descendant of a spiritual descendant of the Alter from Kelm. So his name was Simcha Zisel Broida. Many of the yeshivos in Lithuania were planning, before Hitler beat them to it, to leave Eastern Europe and to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. One of them was their Alter, after Alter again, the Alter of Slobodka, whose name was Nosson Tzvi Finkel. There was a much more recent Nosson Tzvi Finkel who passed away tragically, relatively young, a few years ago. But the original Nosson Tzvi Finkel took a number of students from Slobodka, which is somewhere in Lithuania, and he said, let's establish a yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, and he chose, of all places, Hebron. And there was a yeshiva in Hebron in the 1920s until there was a tragic massacre of the Jews of Hebron in 1929, and many of the young men and the teachers and Rabbeim of that yeshiva were victims of that massacre. But that yeshiva of Hebron then moved. They left Hebron. It was too dangerous to stay there, although Jews had lived continuously in Hebron at relative peace with our neighbors for centuries. But that all ended with that massacre. People tried to go back, and until the Six-Day War, there was couldn't happen. And then now there's again, Baruch Hashem, settlement. People are in Hebron. But the yeshiva of Hebron that Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel himself founded continued in Yerushalayim. And that's where it is to this day. There's a yeshiva called the Yeshiva of Hebron, but it's not in Hebron, it's in Yerushalayim. There are yeshivos in Hebron, and maybe deserve the title, the Yeshiva of Hebron. But if you speak to people in the yeshiva world, the Yeshiva of Hebron is one of the major yeshivos in the world, and Eretz Yisrael for sure, and it's based in Yerushalayim. The Rosh Yeshiva from the 1950s through the 1990s was this man, Rav Simcha Zisel Broide, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron. I was privileged, truly privileged, to meet him because in his later years, he was seeking some medical attention at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, and he spent some time in Baltimore. He stayed with the Rosh Yeshiva then, with Rav Ruderman Zatzal, on the yeshiva campus near UIsrael of Baltimore. And since he was there, occasionally he would be feeling better, whatever was ailing him. To this day, I don't know exactly what his medical condition was, but he was old and weak. And but he would let the word out, they'd like to have a little chabura, a little group of Talmidim. I was not a Talmud at that yeshiva, but I was living there. And I was one of the people who were invited to those chaburos, and I was able to hear him in person. He was an extremely special person in every way, in that he didn't dress like a Rosh Yeshiva. He didn't have a beard like most Rosh Yeshivas would have, especially from these yeshivos. At that point, he grew a beard toward the end of his life. He started off every drasha with some humor, right? To tell stories. Sometimes we were sitting there and saying, okay, let's hear some Torah. But he would tell us the history of the yeshiva. He would speak a lot about the massacre in Hebron and the recovery from the massacre and building up the yeshiva and many other things. It was a great privilege. Towards the end of his life, he began to realize that he had to leave something for eternity. So he began to ask people to record, to share their notes. At that time, there were recordings made of many of his shiurim. And his specialty was the work of the Ramban al Hatorah. So we have nowadays, there is a 6-volume set of svarim called V'Sam Derech. Spells out his name. V'Sam is Simcha Zisel. He had a third name, Menachem, I think, Broide. And it's 5 volumes on the Parshios HaShavua, 6 volumes on the Parshios HaShavua, and based upon his lectures that he was giving for many, many, many years. Every week he would give a lecture on the Ramban al Hatorah for the Parshios HaShavua. And he also would give special shiurim in preparation for each of the Chagim. So there's a sefer out now, there's the Haggadah Shel Pesach with his lectures pre-Pesach. There's a sefer he has on Hanukkah, and what he said before and on Hanukkah. And there is his sefer called Chever Ma'amorei Torah. It's one volume, but I was told Machon Yerushalayim just published an expansion of that particular work, Chever Ma'amorei Al HaTorah. So with my wife's permission, I might buy that sefer. We have no room for it on the shelves, etc. But I'm just in love with his writings, and I want to share two selections with you. And the topic that he chooses for two of these essays in preparation for Chag HaShavuos about Kavod Hatorah. Now remember, his audience were yeshiva bachrim, or b'nei chaverim in the kollel of Yeshivas Chevron. So he's not necessarily talking to a wide audience, but as I hope to show you, it certainly applies to the audience that we're privileged to attend today. So let's take a look at it. It's entitled. This is one subsection of one much larger essay. Ha'ma'or shebatorah kefi midat chashivutah v'harachata. The light of Torah is correlated to the degree to which you hold Torah chashuv, you hold it important, and the extent to which you value it, harachata. So you have to have a certain attitude toward Torah. One is passion, another is anticipation, another is enjoying what you're learning. But he's emphasizing that you have to hold it dear, you have to value it, you have to think of it as precious, and you have to value it. So he begins with a quote from a Gemara in Maseches Nedorim. And it reads, the first paragraph, Aleph Reish Yud, means Omer Rabbi Yehuda Omer Rav, Mai Dirsiv, the pasuk in Yirmiyahu. And for me, personally, almost immediately after Shavuos, I begin to prepare for my, I've been giving now for well over 30 years, a yearly website, webcast on Tisha B'Av. And there's various connections between Torah and Tisha B'Av. And this is one of them. Yirmiyahu HaNavi is wondering, how can we explain the Churban? Yirmiyahu HaNavi witnessed personally, was an eyewitness to the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, or the first temple. And he, of course, lamented it. And that's the Sefer of Eichel, Lamentations. But what he asks in the Sefer Yirmiyahu, he asks, Miho ish hachacham v'yovein esos. Who can possibly understand, can be wise enough to understand why there was a Churban, why there was a destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, why there was an exile of the Jewish people, why all the tragedy, what did we do wrong? So the Gemara says, Dovar zeh nishal hachachamim v'laneviim v'lo pishua. That question, why? And it's a question that we can ask many, many times since the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash. We've had all sorts of terrible tragedies, including recent ones, very recent ones. And why? So this question was asked to both Chachamim and to Nevi'im. You think Nevi'im would have access to a higher authority, and they would know. V'lo pirshu, they couldn't explain it. Why? Ad shepirshu HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmo. It was God Himself who had to give the answer. Dirsiv, and Yirmiyahu HaNavi says in Pasuk Yud Beis of that Perek Tes in Yirmiyahu, Vayomer Hashem, the Ribono Shalom Himself said, Al ozvom es Torosi, because they abandoned my Torah. Asher nosati lifneihem, which I, God, gave to them. V'lo shamu v'koli, they didn't listen to my voice. V'lo halchu bo, and they didn't go in my path, the path of the Torah. So the Gemara asks the question, Lo shamu b'koli, they didn't listen to my voice. I got it. They didn't listen to God. So what do I have to say? V'lo halchu bo, that you didn't walk in the paths. If you didn't hear God, didn't obey God, you didn't care what He said, of course you didn't travel in on His path. Hainu lo shamu v'koli, hainu lo halchu bo, it's the same thing. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Lomar, to teach you, she'ein, what the problem was, she'ein mevorchin b'Torah techila. They studied Torah, but they didn't recite a bracha before making the Torah, before studying the Torah. It's mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. They studied Torah, all right? They had yeshivos and kollalim and women's seminaries, and everyone was studying Torah, but they didn't recite the bracha before the Torah. There's a bracha that we say every morning. I'll speak about that a little bit, about women's obligation to making that bracha as well. And many poskim say, contemporary poskim as well, that since women nowadays do study Torah in one way or another, like the present group right this moment, they should recite the Brechas HaTorah. They should recite it every morning and during the day study. There's no minimum quantity of how much Torah you have to study. You can study one Mishnah, you can study one Pasuk. You have to make the bracha. And the bracha is to be found, said a whole set of brachos in any siddur, just about any siddur. And they didn't recite that bracha. So how are we to understand that? Now, Maseches Nedarim is one of the tractates in the Talmud for which we do not have the commentary of Rashi. And that makes Torah study extremely difficult. Imagine studying Chumash without Rashi. We're studying Gemara for most tractates without Rashi. Rashi covered almost all of them, but not all. And one of them that, for whatever reason, he didn't get around to, or perhaps he wrote the commentary, but it was lost. But we don't have that. Although if you open a standard Gemara, you will see that there is a place on the page for Rashi. But scholars call it pseudo-Rashi, P-S-E-U-D-O. It's not really Rashi. And anyone who's familiar with Rashi's style, Rashi's brevity, Rashi's humility, which comes across in every phrase that Rashi wrote in his vast writings, but it doesn't come across in that particular writing. But instead, somewhere back in the history of the publications of the Talmud, someone decided, if we don't have Rashi, let's put the commentary on the page of one of the later Rishonim, lived maybe 200 years after Rashi, Rabbi the Ran, Reish Nun, Rabbi Nissim. Rabbi Nissim ben Reuven, Ran Bar, Reish Nun Beis Reish. It's usually referred to as the Ran, and that's the commentary on Maseches Nedarim for anyone who studies that Masechta carefully. And Nedarim is a whole Masechta about vows, about making Nedarim. The parsha coming up soon, not this Shabbos, but next Shabbos, Parshas Naso, we will read about Nazirut and other Nedarim. But here, the Ran comments, what is the problem with not making a bracha? I mean, if you don't make a bracha on bread, for whatever reason, you eat your bread and you don't make a motzi, so does the world come to an end? Literally, your whole world comes to an end. Your Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. You go into exile because you failed to make a bracha, or any other bracha. But if you don't make Berachos HaTorah, it's a catastrophe. Why? So he writes. This is a quote from the Ran on the page on the Daf Pei Aleph in Maseches Nedarim. He found b'Megillas Sisorim shel Rabbeinu Yonah Zal. Rabbeinu Yonah is also someone worth a lot of discussion, but he was a Rishon. He was actually a first cousin of Ramban and a contemporary of Ramban. Not Rambam, but Ramban. And he was a great, great thinker and also a Baal Musar. The Sefer Sharei Tshuva, which is one of the foundational works of the Musar movement, studying that work, was written by Rabbeinu Yonah. So the Ran had a kind of a notebook that he must have found, a private notebook that belonged to Rabbeinu Yonah, and he quotes from here. Dekro hochi dayak, the al shelo borchu batorah tchila of the haaretz. That look, it says here that because we didn't make the bracha on Torah, the whole land was destroyed. Israel was emptied out. Maybe a few stragglers remained behind. We were exiled to the four corners of the earth, and the Beis Hamikdash was rubble. The im isa al ozvam es torosi kapashto mash mashazvu es hatorah v'lo hayoskin ba. It would seem from the pasuk, They abandoned the Torah, God says. Abandoned it means they didn't study a word of Torah. They put the Torah in the library, closed the door, and never consulted it. But no, because why did all these wise men and prophets not know? If they weren't studying Torah, okay, I see, they weren't studying Torah. They had a base madrash on the lock and key, and nobody ever went in. Well, no dover goli with obvious. It's an easy explanation. And Levada, he writes, Oskin hayu Torah. Tomid. They were studying Torah constantly. They were learning Torah day and night. Therefore, all these wise people were stunned, confounded. With studying Torah all day, all the yeshivas are full, they're overflowing, etc., etc. Wonderful. So why this destruction? Tameim, only God knew the answer. Why God? Shehu yodeya ma'amake halev. Now, your eyes can see 200 Baruchim in the yeshiva learning day and night, but you don't know what's in their hearts. The Ribono Shel Olam knows what's in their hearts at the time, in their emotions, in their feelings, in their intentions, in their dreams, in their ambitions, in their fears, in their desires, in their human relationships, etc. Ribono Shel Olam knows the ma'amake halev, the depth of the heart. And the depth of the heart was, Shelo hayu mevorchen b'Torah tchila. What does it mean not to make a bracha? Klomar, Shelo hoisa haTorah chashuva beineihem. The Torah wasn't important enough to them to make a bracha. When we're hungry and we sit down to a meal, so, all right, we're glad, all right, if we have any degree of religious orientation, you realize this meal came directly from the Ribono Shel Olam. He's the mefarnes of all of us. So we make a bracha with some degree of kavanah. Baruch Hashem, I have bread. Not everybody has bread. I have bread, I have a soup, I have fish, I have a kugel. Baruch Hashem, so I make brachos, whatever the proper bracha is. That's fine, but the Torah is not chashuva. Well, big deal. I come 9 o'clock, I open up the Gemara, I study it, very nice, but it's not chashuv. It's not something on the top of the list. Somehow they don't feel like making a bracha. Bracha is a spiritual expression of how much you thank the Ribono Shel Olam for where you're at. Well, I took a course in mathematics, I took a course in history, I took a course in sociology, so I didn't make a bracha on that, so why should I make a bracha on Torah? Torah is another subject like any other subject. Maybe it's more holy some way, but it's not more chashuv. You don't make a bracha. I didn't make a bracha on my math class. Shelo hayu oskim Balishma. They didn't learn Torah with the proper attitude, which is to understand what you're studying. You're studying something that's very, very chashuv. So therefore they were very lenient with the bracha. Maybe sometimes they made a bracha, maybe they didn't. Maybe they mumbled a few words. Maybe they muttered a few words and skipped a few words of the bracha. That's what it means. They didn't go on the path. There has to be some intensity, some passion, some commitment, some feeling. So that's the words of the Rav HaChassid. Rabbi Yonah was a very pious person, and Ran gives him his stamp of approval. V'heim no'im. These are beautiful words. Ru'uyin lemisha omram. Lemisha omram. That these words fit the Rabbi Yonah. The Ran says Yashkayach, Rabbi Yonah for saying these words. What was missing is the bracha. The bracha is the container of one's feelings, as he uses it, what's going on in the imke halev, in your heart. Right? You could learn a Gemara that has zero to do with religion, which has to do with what happens if your ox gores my ox. So I'm learning that. One has to realize that's also something which deserves a bracha, deserves a blessing, it deserves an expression coming from your heart. That's what's kavanah, that's what's lishma, that was what was missing. And if that's missing, then the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, the Jews go into exile. That's obviously very, very powerful. And that's in spite of the fact, as he points out in the next paragraph, Vaday oskim hayu b'Torah tomid. They were learning, 24/7. Or maybe they slept a little bit at night. They were masmidim gedolim, but the feeling wasn't there. The bracha wasn't there. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hayodeya Ma'amake Lev, he says, Lo hoiso Hatorah chashuva. And mitoch kach mizalzelim b'virchasa. So that's the essence of this particular passage. And again, he's writing, of course. I spoke these words, and they were now encoded in print. But he's speaking to Yeshiva Bachrim. He's speaking to Kolel Yungalite who need to hear this. We really need to hear this. But it applies to all of us. It applies to all of us. To the extent that we study Torah, we have to make a bracha which promotes the Torah from being a body of intellectual material and changing it, converting it into a religious experience, a spiritual experience. That's what the bracha does. If you pay attention to the words of the bracha, Baruch Atah, you're speaking directly to the one above, you, in the first person. I speak to you, God, Baruch Atah Hashem, King Melech HaOlam, Shekshanav Mitzvosov, V'tzivonu La'asok B'divrei Torah, and the rest of the bracha, Shebaruch Abonim Mikol Amim, etc. But that bracha switches the whole study of Torah into a spiritual experience, which is not always something, the material of the Torah is not always, quote, spiritual, what the world calls spiritual. It has to do with all sorts of technical things, with business arrangements, with charging interest, with all sorts of things. It doesn't always sound spiritual, the current use of the word spiritual. You spiritualize it with the bracha, and the bracha is the essence. And the bracha, of course, is not just the words of the bracha, it's the entire experience of doing something which is chashuv and worthy of valuing very highly. And then I'll stop here after I do the next piece of his writings. And for questions, I see one or two people have their hands up. If you turn the page, the second piece I'd like to share with you relates mamash to Inyane Diyoma, to things going on nowadays. Which is we're in the middle of Sfira, near the end of Sfira. And the Sfira, we know the story which he begins with. Yeser al-Kaini says, furthermore, Chazal say, it's a Gemara in Yevamos, that Yud Beis Elev, 12,000 pair, Elev Zugim, 12,000 pair of Talmidim, Hoyolol Rabbi Akiva, Migvas ad Antifras. People who are experts in the geography of Israel wonder exactly where Gavas was and where Antifras is or was. But anyway, Rabbi Akiva had thousands and thousands of Talmidim. V'chulan meisu b'perek echad. They all died during this season between Pesach and Shavuos. Why? Mipnei shelo nohagu kavod ze lo ze. Because they didn't conduct their personal relationships with each other, b'derech kavod. They didn't respect each other. That's the sin. That's all we know. 12,000 pair, 24,000 Talmidim of all people, Rabbi Akiva. They had a wonderful Rebbe, and nothing. Mashallah nagu kavod ha'echad im chavero. That's the only sin that they had. Then he expands on that. What's the significance? Rabbi Akiva really is the link in the chain of Torah Shebaal Peh. Without Rabbi Akiva, we would have no Torah Shebaal Peh. Because after he lost these thousands of students, he went to another place, not to Gavas Antifros, but he went Ladorom, which could be anywhere, south of the north, and in Eretz Yisrael. And he didn't have 24,000 students. He had 5 or 6. And they included Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, etc. Those 5 or 6, they're the ones who continued Torah. So Rabbi Akiva is like this crucial focal point in the whole Torah. From Sinai down to this day, Rabbi Akiva is the link. But that link would have been broken if Rabbi Akiva wasn't. This is a whole other discussion. Rabbi Akiva, in my opinion, was the epitome of what today is called resilience. You couldn't stop Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva supported the revolt of Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba lost, and Rabbi Akiva kept going. All right? Rabbi Akiva is the one who taught that if a person loses his spouse, he has to remarry. He has to keep going. He's the person who, when he lost 24,000 Talmidim. He went somewhere else and found another few and kept perpetuating Torah. He just was, I was to see him last night when someone finished Maseches Makos, Rabbi Akiva, when he went with his friends and he saw foxes walking around in the territory of the holiest places in the Beis HaMikdash, and they were distraught. And he said, why are you distraught? Beautiful, you know. Now I see one nevuah is being fulfilled. Foxes are walking around the holiest of holies. But the next Navi, so it speaks about, you know, all right, the time is going to come when all people are going to sit in the park. Baruch Hashem, we have an apartment right around the corner from Gan Shili. I go there often and sit in the park and watch. I think I qualify as an old man, and I sit there with my, not with my cane, but the picture of Zechariah Hanavi, which is what Rabbi Akiva is referring to, the nevuah of Zechariah, that there would be children playing in the park, and it's going to be a different type of thing. So Rabbi Akiva is resilient, a perennial optimist, although he had many reasons until his dying moments, to be quite pessimistic, but he was always resilient. But here, the point that Rabbi Brody wants to make is, there's nothing that remains from those 24,000 Talmidim. We have no notes, we have no Sforim, but there's not a word in all of Shas, Bavli, and Yerushalmi that quotes one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. So it's all gone. Nishtakha Hatorah, that's the words of Rashi. Torah was forgotten. Had Rabbi Akiva not persisted and enlisted to new Talmidim, there would be no Torah. No Torah. That's the tragedy. And what's the cause of it? Shalom nohagu kavod zeh b'zeh. Because they didn't respect each other. They put each other down. I mean, you go sometimes into a Beis Medrash, and I'm not criticizing it, but watch how the people argue with each other. No, you dummy, you don't understand Rashi. And the other one says, I'm a dummy, you're a good dummy. Well, that's lo nohagu kavod zeh b'zeh. You know, maybe your chavrus is making a mistake, so you have to say, you know, Shmerel, you know, I'm sorry, I think you maybe are misunderstanding the Rashi. Let's review it. Let's see. There's a way of talking with derech kavod, and often it's not derech kavod, and sometimes kavod is very hard to define. People people get angry. People are really committed to learning Torah, and a mistake. Whoa, mistake! I got to protest in the streets because someone's making a mistake in the Pshat and the Rambam. No, that doesn't work that way. Lack of kavod can cancel Torah. Shenishtakha Torah. Torah can be forgotten. Rabbi Akiva went out and found some other young men, and they found that they were no way kavod zeh b'zeh. And all of them had difficult lives. They were all living under Roman dictatorship. Not pashut, but they had kavod zeh b'zeh, and that's the continuation of the Torah, isn't that? Okay, I got a signal that the time is running out. What I would like to do, at least touch upon a bit, although it's a big topic, is women and Torah study, and women and the Birchas HaTorah. And it's a big topic, and I just want to share with you from several Sforim that I happen to bring along. I want to make direct quotes and actually read from the text, because I think you'll find them extremely, extremely important and very relevant to each and every one of you. I'm going to begin, I guess, in terms of rank, I should begin with the Rambam. One of the Rambam's works is Sefer HaMitzvos. The Rambam was one of the many who tried to enumerate the mitzvos. We have a Gemara that says there are Taryag mitzvos, 613 mitzvos. Okay, I got to do something with all the Sforim. Okay. So the Rambam has a list, 248 mitzvos aseh, and was it 365 mitzvos lo aseh. At the end of his section of mitzvos aseh, he says something. This is not in your sheets, but you might want to take notes of what he has to say. because toward the very end, the Rambam in all of these mitzvos makes it his business to end each mitzvah by saying who is exempt from this mitzvah and who is obligated in this mitzvah. And he especially focuses on which mitzvos are for men and not for women, and which mitzvos are for zechorim und kavod, for men and for women. Now, at the very end of his whole section of mitzvos aseh, positive commands, he says, Hinenis boer lecha, you now know, this is his grand summary, Shemishishim hamitzvos hahechrachiyos ha'ela. There are 60 necessary mitzvos. Many of the mitzvos, they're not going to happen again so soon. Maybe Mashiach will come. A lot of them have to do with korbanos. A lot of them are not necessary, only in special occasions, etc. But there are 60 mitzvos that they come up every day. Mitzvos aseh. So of the 60, 46 of them are obligatory upon women as well as men. Right. So we know there's certain mitzvos which are important mitzvos, but women are not obligated in them. They are the mitzvos aseh sha'asman groma, and they include shofar and sukkah and lulav, which are important mitzvos. And the minhag, at least the Ashkenaz minhag, is for women to perform those mitzvos in one way or another, and even recite a bracha on those mitzvos. But it's not compulsory upon a woman. So there's 46 of the 60, that's a big proportion, that are chovah gam lanashim. V'arba esrei mitzvos bohen, einon chayavos bohen. So if you do the arithmetic, 60 minus 46 is 14. So only 14 of the 60 compulsory, daily kinds of mitzvos. So you can forget the others. Most of them have to do with Shmirat Shabbos, Kibbut Avoim, etc., etc. Kavod Hatorah is also a mitzvah, etc. The women are obligated, and though the same as men. V'yiyah lecho hasimon. The Rambam gives us a mnemonic device. How am I going to remember the numbers? 60, 46. So he says, the pasuk says in Shir Hashirim, Shishim Hema Malachos. All right, there are 60 kingdoms. All right, so each mitzvah is a kingdom. The pasuk in Shir Hashirim, capital Vav, and V'yiyah hasimon bahashmotas ha'arba. And if you want to have a pasuk to remind you, so it's a pasuk in the Chumash Devarim, Perek Lamed Beis, Ozlas Yod. Yod is 14, Yod Daled. Ozlas means went away. So from the 60, Shishim Hema Malachos, there are 14 Yad, Yod Daled, that do not apply to women. That's 60 minus 14. You're left with 46 that do apply. Or you have another simon. An interesting one from a pasuk in Zechariah again. The pasuk says, "Gam at." At is a feminine second person pronoun. Bedam b'riseich. You with the blood of the covenant. All right. Bedam is 46. The mem is 40. Dalet is 4 plus 2 for the base. 46. Bedam. That these 46 are the blood, the essence, the life force of you in the feminine, at brisech, dam, bedam brisech, feminine pronouns all the way. Bedam, that's your blood. That's your blood. That's your life force. 46 mitzvos. All right. Kolomar, minyan bedam, the gematria of bedam, chovo lahen, that's an obligation for women. Vehem habris hamayuchedes leisha behechreach. Those are the mitzvahs which are special, especially important for women. Zel masharinu, etc. So that's the Rambam emphasizing the importance of this. There's another sefer of a Rishon, who counted the mitzvos, and that's the Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch is written by, it's not 100% certain, but it's usually identified with one of the Rishonim, the Ra'ah. And he says as follows, this is to be found in Mitzvah Reish Nun Zayin, which is the mitzvah of Kavod Chachamim. And the question is, Kavod Chachamim, is a woman obligated to stand up for a Talmid Chacham? How do you define Talmid Chacham? Are there Talmidei Chachamim of that level nowadays? These are also all interesting questions, which I can't get into now. But a Chacham, he goes on to say, a Chacham is obligated to stand for another Chacham. And he continues, this author of the Sefer HaChinuch, and he says, of course, this mitzvah applies to women the same as to men. A woman is also obligated in the mitzvah of Kibbut Chachamim. But the question he raises is, what about standing up for a woman? All right? What about standing up for a woman who is a Chachama or who is an old woman, an old lady? One of the most dramatic scenes I've ever seen. Chavi and I, long ago, attended a wedding here in Eretz Yisrael of one of the children of one of the sons of the late Rabbi Moshe Tendler, who was a grandson of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Zatzal, but Rebbetzin Feinstein then was still alive and well enough to march down the aisle. And I was sitting with all sorts of people, but also all the Rosh Yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael were present. This is Moshe's grandson, Moshe Feinstein's grandson getting married. So all the Ponevezh Rosh Yeshivas, I remember I was sitting very close to Rav Povarsky, Zatzal. The old Rav Povarsky was one of the Rosh Yeshivas of Ponevezh. When Mrs. Rebbetzin Feinstein came down the hall, walked down the hall, and they saw who was coming, they all stood up. They all stood up for her. Now, some look at that because she was an Eishes Chover. She was a Moshe Feinstein's wife, and it was his cover that they're honoring. But I'm going to just quote a line from the Minchas Chinuch, which is the 19th century commentary on the Sefer HaChinuch. And here's what he writes. Umasha Kosav Rav HaMechaber. What the Rav HaMechaber, meaning the author of the Sefer HaChinuch, says, "V'no heges b'zechorim unukevos," that this mitzvah applies to men and to women equally. Ze pashut. That's obvious. You shouldn't ask any questions about that. Ula inyan la'amod lifnei isha zekena, and to stand for a woman who is zekena can mean elderly, an elderly woman, an old woman, a savta, or a savta rabbah, right? Like many of us. And do you stand up for that? Or zekena can mean a woman who is a chacham. Could be a woman who knows Torah. So he says, Lididan, according to our psak halacha, the maskinan, the conclusion is the Isi ben Yehuda, the afilu zokein ashma'ai. You have a Gentile old man or a Gentile old woman. Do you stand for that person? The Gemara says, and the halacha is yes. So he says, if you stand for a zokein ashma'ai, you stand for some non-Jewish person who's worthy of the honor because of his or her age, no, bevadai chayiv la'amod mipnei isha zekena. That's his conclusion. But then he points out other opinions, but that's his conclusion. And then he says, v'yefsha, at a different level, there's such a concept of a person who may not be so learned, but he's what's called a Baal Masim. He gets things done. He performs mitzvos. He's mevaker cholim. He helps out in the Chevra Kadisha. The person is a person of masim. The lashon is b'masehem. Heim medakdekim b'masehem. So he says, certainly the din baal masim, or in this case baalat masim. If you have a woman who may not be so learned, and she may only be 21 or whatever, and she's not an old lady, but she's a baalat masim. She's a person who does mitzvos, who helps people in whatever way. And she's a baal masim. She's into it big time. Of course, no question about it. They deserve the Kavod Hatorah. So these are just some thoughts on Kavod Hatorah. Mi'etz Hashem, we should have a Chodesh Tov and a Chag Sameach, and we should be zoche to Shalom al Yisrael.
Thank you very, very much. And what we're going to do right now is everyone's going to quickly come take bagels and spreads, come sit down, and